When our family decided to take a week-long vacation to the coast, I told myself I'd try to let go of old grudges and just breathe. I wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, this trip could be a reset for all of us, a chance to remember what family was supposed to feel like. For years, things between us had been strained. My brother Ethan and I were opposites in every possible way. He was the golden boy, confident, charming, and loud in a way that drew every eye in the room. I was the quiet one, the listener, the one who stayed behind to clean up the messes his charisma left behind. I used to envy how easily people loved him, how laughter followed him wherever he went. But somewhere along the way, his jokes stopped being harmless fun and started cutting deep. I told myself I'd forgiven him for those years. That time had made it easier. But the truth is, old wounds don't heal just because you pretend they don't hurt anymore. We arrived at the resort early on a Sunday morning, sunlight spilling across the horizon like liquid gold. The ocean stretched endlessly before us, the rhythmic crash of waves promising peace I desperately wanted to feel. Mom was smiling, the way she hadn't in months, snapping pictures of everything from the palm trees to the welcome sign. Dad was already in vacation mode, sunglasses on, drink in hand, humming an old tune as he dragged our suitcases toward the villa. Ethan, of course, was the star of the show. He had his arms slung around his best friend Liam, both of them wearing matching smirks. They'd convinced Mom to let them bring a few friends along. So it wouldn't be boring, Ethan had said. I hadn't minded at first. I figured I could use the quiet, take long walks, maybe finish the sketches I'd been neglecting. But when Ethan's friends greeted me with those knowing grins, the ones that said we've heard stories about you, I felt a familiar chill beneath the summer heat. The first day passed easily enough. We explored the resort, lounged by the pool, and shared dinner on the open deck. Ethan was, as always, the entertainer, telling exaggerated stories, mimicking teachers from high school, making everyone laugh until their cheeks hurt. I smiled politely, said little, and tried to focus on the sound of the ocean behind his voice. But I could feel his eyes flick toward me occasionally, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth, like he was planning something. It was always like that with him. Every interaction a setup, every smile a disguise for the next punchline. On the second night, he struck. We were all gathered around the long wooden table by the pool, the sun melting into the horizon, the air warm with laughter and clinking glasses. I was actually starting to enjoy myself until I saw Ethan pull out his phone. He turned the screen toward the table, grinning. "Hey, remember this?" he said. On his phone was a photo of me from middle school, my braces shining, my bangs cut unevenly, my awkward smile stretched too wide. "Look, everyone," he said. "She hasn't changed a bit." The table erupted in laughter. Even Mom chuckled awkwardly, like she didn't know which side to take. My face burned. I forced a laugh, hoping it would pass quickly, but Ethan wasn't done. He started scrolling through old pictures, narrating each one. Here's her trying to look cool. Here's her crying at the spelling bee. Here's her with that old crush. Oh, remember him? Each word was a dagger wrapped in humor, and the worst part was that everyone seemed complicit. I excused myself quietly, pretending I had a headache, and walked back to my room. The laughter followed me down the hall like an echo that wouldn't fade. Inside, I closed the door and let the silence hit. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor until my eyes blurred. It wasn't the photo that broke me. It was how natural it had felt for them to laugh. As if this was just what families did. As if my humiliation was tradition. I stared at my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the girl looking back. She looked small, tired, and tired of pretending it didn't matter. I promised myself then that I'd pull away. No arguments, no confrontation, just distance. I'd survive the rest of the trip quietly. That was the plan. The next morning, Ethan seemed cheerful, almost too cheerful. Over breakfast, he leaned over and said, "Hey, we're renting a boat today. You're coming, right?" His tone was innocent enough, but I knew that tone. I hesitated, but Mom looked so excited I couldn't say no. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe he'd gotten it out of his system. Maybe for once we'd just have fun. We set out around noon. The boat rocked gently as we sped over clear turquoise water, the wind whipping through my hair, the scent of salt and sunscreen filling the air. It was beautiful, too beautiful for what was coming. We stopped near a small island, the kind with white sand and coral reefs visible beneath the surface. Everyone jumped in for a swim except me. I sat near the edge, feet dangling over the water, sketchbook resting on my knees. Ethan noticed. "What's wrong?" he called out. "Afraid of sharks?" His friends laughed. "No," I said simply. "Just enjoying the view." He swam closer, water glistening on his shoulders, that same mischievous smile spreading. "You sure you don't want to join?" "I'm fine," I said. That's when he decided to make it funny. "Guys!" he shouted to the others. "Did you know she can't swim?" I frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, come on," he said, grinning at the group. "Remember that time you freaked out in the lake when we were kids? She's terrified of deep water." His friends laughed again. "I'm not scared," I said quietly. "Good," he said, and before I could move, he shoved me. The shock of the water was instant, cold, suffocating. My lungs seized as I went under, disoriented, the salt stinging my eyes. For a moment, panic took over. I kicked upward, breaking the surface, gasping for air. Laughter filled the air. His laughter, the others, a chorus of cruel amusement. I heard the click of a camera, someone recording, Ethan shouting, "Relax! It's just a joke!" My arms trembled as I treaded water, my heart pounding. I could see Mom on the boat, frozen between confusion and disbelief, and Dad yelling for Ethan to stop filming. But Ethan just laughed harder. I swam to the side ladder and climbed up, dripping and shaking, the salt mixing with tears I refused to shed in front of them. When I stepped back on deck, Ethan grinned. "Come on, don't be mad," he said. "It's just a bit of fun." I didn't respond. I wrapped a towel around myself and sat in silence, watching the waves crash against the side of the boat. The laughter had stopped now. Maybe they'd finally realized it had gone too far. But it didn't matter. Something inside me had already shifted. On the way back to shore, I barely heard the conversation around me. My mind was quiet, coldly focused. I wasn't angry, not in the screaming, fiery way I used to get. It was deeper than that. It was the kind of anger that simmers, that sharpens into resolve. For the first time, I saw Ethan clearly, not as my brother, not as the charming boy everyone adored, but as someone who had built his joy on my humiliation. And I knew something had to change. That night, I didn't join them for dinner. I stayed on the balcony instead, watching the sunset bleed into the sea. The sky was painted in hues of gold and crimson, beautiful and cruel all at once. I replayed the day over and over in my head, the shove, the laughter, the sting of salt in my eyes. And underneath it all, a promise began to form. I didn't know what it would look like yet, but I knew this. Ethan's joke wouldn't be the last laugh. This time the story would end differently. This time, he'd understand how it feels when laughter turns to silence. I went to bed with the sound of waves crashing in the distance, the same rhythm I'd once found comforting. But now it felt like a heartbeat, steady, deliberate, patient. The kind of rhythm that waits for the perfect moment to turn the tide. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt awake, and somewhere deep inside, I knew that karma was already listening. The morning after Ethan's prank, the resort felt different. Maybe it was the sunlight filtering through the curtains, or maybe it was me. Something in me had hardened overnight. I moved through breakfast quietly, barely acknowledging anyone. Mom tried to make small talk about the snorkeling trip later that day, but her eyes wouldn't meet mine. Ethan sat across the table, avoiding my gaze too, pretending to scroll through his phone. For once, he wasn't smirking. Maybe even he sensed he'd gone too far. But the strange thing was, I didn't want an apology. I didn't want him to say he was sorry, or to hear Mom tell him to behave. I wanted something real, something that would make him feel what I had felt on that boat. Not the shock or fear of falling into cold water, but the burn of being laughed at when you're drowning. For the rest of the trip, I stayed quiet, polite, calm, almost serene. On the surface, I looked like I'd moved on. I joined family dinners, laughed at Dad's jokes, and even helped Ethan's friends take pictures by the beach. But beneath that calm exterior, my mind was already building a plan. I didn't want revenge in the childish sense of getting even. I wanted a reflection. I wanted to hold up a mirror so Ethan could finally see himself the way I did. The universe had given me the perfect setting, an audience, a stage, and just enough time. Ethan's weakness had always been his hunger for validation. He lived through the lens of his phone. Every moment was a potential story, every meal an aesthetic photo, every person in his orbit just a character in the comedy he called his life. The night after his prank, I'd scrolled through his Instagram. Videos, reels, and clips, all of them centered around him laughing, teasing, just joking. What he didn't realize was that his obsession with appearances was also his downfall. If he needed attention so badly, I'd give him more than he could handle. 2 days later, I overheard the resort staff talking about a family talent night scheduled for the last evening. Guests could perform skits, tell stories, or sing. Just a fun way to end the vacation. The moment I heard it, I knew this was my stage. I didn't know exactly what I'd do yet, but I knew it would be there under those warm lights. That I'd show Ethan the difference between laughter and humiliation. That same afternoon, Ethan announced at lunch, "Guess what? I'm signing us up for talent night. I'm doing a comedy skit, living with the world's worst sister." He grinned, waiting for a reaction. Everyone laughed, even Dad, though half-heartedly. I smiled too, pretending not to mind. "Sounds fun," I said lightly. "Maybe I'll join too." He raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you're going to sing your sad sketches?" He teased. "Something like that," I said, sipping my drink. Over the next few days, Ethan busied himself with rehearsals. I watched from the sidelines as he practiced jokes with his friends, mimicking my voice, exaggerating my shyness, pretending to be me in ridiculous situations. They thought it was hilarious. I watched them laugh, pretending I didn't care. I waited for the right moment, and it came sooner than I expected. One afternoon, Ethan and his friends were lounging by the pool, their phones scattered across the table. They were filming clips for his vlog, laughing about how the prank video had gotten so many views on his private story. My chest tightened when I realized he'd actually posted it. That was it, the final straw. When they all went for a swim, leaving their things behind, I noticed Ethan's phone sitting unlocked. My heart pounded, but I didn't hesitate. I picked it up, scrolling through his camera roll. There they were, dozens of clips. Me spilling drinks, tripping, being caught off guard by his jokes. Moments of my life turned into punchlines. But one video made my breath catch. The boat prank. It started with laughter, the camera jerking as Ethan turned it toward me, sitting at the edge of the boat. "She's so serious all the time," he whispered to the camera. "Let's see if she lightens up." Then the shove. The splash. I gasped as I hit the water. In the background, one of his friends shouted, "Dude, that's not funny. What if she gets hurt?" Ethan's voice came through clearly. "Relax, she's fine. She'll make it." The laughter that followed was colder than the water I'd fallen into. I copied the video to my phone, my hands trembling but steady enough to finish. When Ethan climbed out of the pool, I was already gone. That night, I approached the resort manager, a middle-aged woman named Marisol, who ran the event. "I'd like to share something for talent night," I told her. "It's not a performance exactly. More of a story," she smiled warmly. "We'd love that. Just let me know what you need." "A screen," I said quietly. "And speakers." The next evening, the air buzzed with excitement. Families gathered around tables draped with fairy lights, children running between chairs, laughter echoing through the open-air hall. I sat quietly, dressed simply in a white sundress, my hair tied back. I could feel Ethan's gaze on me from across the room, suspicious, curious, maybe even nervous. But he had no idea what was coming. He was scheduled to perform first. When his name was called, he strutted onto the stage, microphone in hand, soaking in the cheers. "Hey, everyone," he said, flashing his signature grin. "So I have a sister. You might have seen her around. She's the quiet one pretending to read while we're all having fun." The crowd chuckled. "Yeah, she's great. Always serious, always dramatic. Like that time I pushed her off the boat? You'd think she was in a horror movie." Laughter rippled through the audience. My stomach twisted, but I didn't flinch. I just smiled. He continued for 10 minutes, building his routine around me. My habits, my silence, my overreactions. The crowd ate it up. By the time he finished, people were clapping, cheering, and asking for more. Ethan bowed dramatically. Thank you. And now my sister's going to tell her side of the story. Be nice, okay?" He winked at me as he stepped off the stage. I stood slowly, my heart steady. I walked up to the microphone, the sound of my sandals against the wood loud in my ears. "Hi," I began softly. "I'm Ethan's sister." There were polite claps. "Families are funny, aren't they? We laugh together, we tease each other. But sometimes we forget that laughter can hurt too." The audience quieted. "I want to show you something," I said. "It's from earlier this week. My brother filmed it." The screen behind me flickered to life. The boat scene played in perfect clarity. Ethan's laughter echoed through the hall. The crowd watched as I was shoved, as I fell, as I struggled in the water while everyone around me laughed. Then came the part that silenced the room, his friend's voice warning him, his dismissal, his arrogance. The clip ended with me climbing back onto the boat, drenched and shaking, my expression breaking the last trace of humor in the air. When the video stopped, no one spoke. I let the silence stretch, heavy and raw. Then I said quietly, "That was my brother." He thought it was funny. I didn't. My voice didn't tremble. It didn't need to. Sometimes we call things jokes because it's easier than admitting we're being cruel. But the truth is, humiliation isn't humor. It's just pain in disguise. I handed the microphone back to the host and walked off stage. Behind me, I heard murmurs. Uncomfortable, unsure, and then quiet. I didn't need to look at Ethan to know his expression. I could feel the shame radiating from him, the confusion of someone who'd finally seen themselves from the outside. As I passed our table, Mom had tears in her eyes. Dad stared at Ethan, his jaw tight, disappointment etched deep. Ethan sat frozen, his smile gone. For the first time, he had no words. His friends avoided his gaze, their laughter replaced by awkward silence. The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was slow, hesitant, thoughtful. The kind of applause that said people weren't sure what they'd just witnessed, but they knew it was real. I walked out to the beach, the music from the event fading behind me. The night air was cool against my skin, the sound of the waves steady, patient. For the first time on all trip, I felt light, not victorious, not proud, just free. I hadn't humiliated him. I'd revealed him, and that was enough. Back in the hall, I heard later, Ethan tried to laugh it off, calling it a misunderstanding, but no one joined in. The magic of his charm had vanished. People saw through it now, the arrogance, the cruelty dressed as comedy. Even his friends stopped recording, their phones lowered, eyes down. The boy who lived for attention had finally met silence. When I returned to our villa that night, everyone was quiet. Ethan didn't look up from his seat when I walked in. Mom whispered, "That was brave," as I passed. I didn't respond. I wasn't seeking validation. I didn't need anyone to tell me I'd done the right thing. Some truths speak loudest in silence. I stepped onto the balcony, letting the ocean wind carry away the noise of the night. For years, I'd been the quiet sister, the shadow in someone else's spotlight. But tonight, for the first time, my voice had filled the room, and it hadn't needed to shout. It had simply told the truth. And the truth, I realized, has its own kind of power. The kind that doesn't need to hurt to heal, the kind that doesn't seek revenge, only balance. As the waves shimmered under the moonlight, I whispered to myself, "Let karma do the rest." The next morning felt like waking up in a different world. The resort, once filled with laughter and easy chatter, carried a strange, heavy silence. The sound of the waves outside still rolled against the shore, calm and unchanging. But inside our villa, everything had shifted. Ethan didn't come down for breakfast. Mom sat across from me, stirring her coffee, her eyes fixed on the table. Dad scrolled absently through his phone, his expression unreadable. When he finally looked up, he said quietly, "Your brother should have known better." That was all. No anger, no shouting, just quiet disappointment that seemed to echo louder than any reprimand could. I went for a walk along the beach after breakfast, needing air. The resort staff I passed gave me knowing glances, polite smiles that lingered a little too long. Word had spread. I could tell. Whispers trailed behind me, fragments of sentences carried by the sea breeze. "That's her," the sister from the video. "Did you see what her brother did?" I didn't feel proud or vindicated, just still, like the waves themselves, steady, measured, inevitable. By noon, Ethan emerged, looking nothing like the golden boy who had strutted across that stage the night before. His eyes were puffy, his confidence gone. He avoided everyone's gaze as he moved through the dining area, collecting a plate of food, only to leave it untouched. His friends sat on the far side of the room, whispering among themselves. I caught snippets of their conversation, words like embarrassing, messed up. I didn't think she'd actually show it. For once, Ethan wasn't the center of attention. He was the lesson. Later, he found me sitting by the shore, sketchbook on my knees, pencil tracing shapes I wasn't really seeing. "Can we talk?" he asked softly. His voice was different, deflated, smaller somehow. I didn't look up right away. "About what?" I asked. He hesitated, kicking at the sand. "Last night," he said. "And the video." I turned a page in my sketchbook. "What about it?" He exhaled shakily. "It was supposed to be a joke," he said, his voice breaking a little. I didn't mean for it to go that far. I closed the book and finally looked at him. The boy who once thrived on laughter and attention now looked like a stranger, lost, humbled, frightened of his own reflection. "The thing about jokes, Ethan," I said quietly, "is they're only funny when everyone's laughing." He looked away, jaw tightening, but I saw the flicker of guilt behind his eyes. "I didn't think it would hurt you like that," he whispered. "You never think," I replied and stood up. The tide had risen, washing away our footprints. "Maybe now you will." For the rest of the day, Ethan kept to himself. His friends left early, claiming they needed to explore the island. Mom tried to comfort him, but even she seemed unsure of what to say. That night, at dinner, the tension was thick enough to drown in. Ethan didn't touch his food. Dad didn't speak to him. And for once, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel small. The balance had shifted, not because I'd hurt him back, but because the truth had finally done what I never could. It exposed him. The next morning, I watched him sitting alone by the pool, scrolling through his phone. His usual grin was gone. I could tell he'd seen the comments online. Somehow, the video had leaked onto the resort's social page. Guests had shared it, condemning his behavior. Cruel humor, disgusting prank. She deserved better. Hundreds of comments poured in, strangers voicing what I'd kept silent for years. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Before we left, he approached me one last time. "I know you hate me," he said quietly. "I don't," I replied. "I just stopped trying to excuse you." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "I deleted everything," he said. "The videos, the photos, all of it." "Good," I said, and that was the end of it. The flight home was quiet. Mom pretended to sleep most of the way. Dad watched the clouds through the window, and Ethan kept his headphones in, staring blankly at the seat in front of him. I leaned against the window, watching the world below shrink into blue and white, and felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. Not the kind that comes from forgiveness, but the kind that comes from letting go. When we returned home, the days that followed were strangely calm. Ethan didn't try to talk to me again. He didn't tease, didn't make jokes, didn't even post online. He seemed smaller, quieter, Maybe he finally understood the weight of silence, the kind that follows after laughter dies. Mom tiptoed around the subject, occasionally saying, "He feels bad, you know." I'd just nod. There was nothing left to say. Weeks turned into months. I focused on myself, on the parts of me that had been overshadowed for years. I started painting again, taking long walks, and even applying for a local art exhibition. Slowly, the world began to feel wider than my brother's shadow. Then one evening, just as the first spring rain began to fall, I got a message from him. It was short. I watched that video again. I didn't realize how cruel I looked. "I'm sorry, really." I stared at it for a long time. My first instinct was to delete it. But something stopped me. I didn't reply, but I didn't erase it either. Some apologies don't need answers. Some wounds heal in silence. A week later, Mom told me Ethan had started volunteering at a youth center near his college. "He says he wants to do something meaningful," she said. There was pride in her voice, but also relief. Maybe guilt had turned into growth. Maybe shame had done what love couldn't: teach him empathy. Months later, I found myself back by the ocean, standing where the tide met the shore. The air was cool, the sky streaked with gold. I thought about that week, the laughter, the humiliation, the silence that followed. It no longer stung. It just existed, a memory softened by time. I closed my eyes and listened to the waves. That sound had once felt cruel, mocking me as I struggled in the water. Now it was steady, patient, almost comforting. I thought of Ethan, not with anger, but with a strange kind of understanding. People like him don't always mean to hurt others. They just never stop to see the damage they cause until someone holds up a mirror. And when they do, when the laughter finally echoes back at them, that's when karma speaks, not with thunder, but with quiet clarity. When I got home that night, I sat by my window and watched the rain fall against the glass. Streetlights reflected in tiny droplets, turning the world outside into a shimmering mosaic. It struck me then, karma isn't dramatic. It doesn't storm in or roar with vengeance. It arrives softly, disguised as realization, humility, the weight of your own reflection. For years, I'd wished for the universe to balance the scales, to make Ethan feel the pain he'd caused me. But standing there, I realized it already had. The lesson had been delivered not by me, but by truth itself. And the truth, when revealed, never needed revenge. It simply needed time. That night, I opened my sketchbook and began to draw. Not the scene of me falling into the ocean, not the moment of humiliation, but the calm after, the horizon, endless and forgiving. The water was still, the light soft. I added 2 small figures standing apart on the sand. The distance between them filled not with bitterness, but silence. As I set down my pencil, I whispered to the quiet room, "Maybe this is how it's supposed to end." No fireworks, no apologies shouted through tears. Just understanding. A quiet recognition that sometimes the best revenge is peace, the kind that comes when you finally stop needing to be seen by the people who once refused to see you. I closed the book, turned off the light, and let the sound of the rain lull me to sleep. Somewhere in another city, maybe Ethan was listening to the same rain, remembering the same waves. Maybe he was finally hearing what I had felt all along, that laughter built on pain always echoes back. And when it does, it doesn't destroy you. It redeems you. Karma had played its hand, not with cruelty, but with grace. And in that grace, I found my freedom.